Welcome to another exciting episode of the Paperback Warrior Podcast. This show directly connects to the paperbackwarrior.com blog where you can find nearly 2,000 posts, reviews, and articles about vintage fiction and their creators. Follow along with the action on YouTube for exclusive videos and social media outlets like Facebook, X, Threads, and TikTok. You can also find the Paperback Warrior content on archive.org and Wikipedia. Today, we're going to discuss a vintage author that sold millions of books, and my guess is you've never heard of this guy. That's okay. After this episode, you'll know his life and literary work and be spending your hard-earned money buying his books all over the globe. His name is Arthur Catherall, and he wrote stories and young adult books from the 1930s through 1980. He was British, he served in World War II, and he traveled the globe to give more authenticity to his literary work. Furthermore, I've read a number of his books, and I think they fit in quite nicely with the nautical fiction you'll find in paperbacks by the likes of Fawcett Gold Medal and Ace Double and Bantam and so forth in the mid-20th century. We're going to talk about the stigma of young adult fiction and how it shouldn't prevent you from reading great adventure novels and stories. Further, I've got a review of a new Starkhouse Press short story collection titled Do You Know Me and Other Aberrations by a great writer named Bruce Elliott. He wrote a number of the Shadow stories, and he contributed heavily to the detective and sci-fi pulps. It's going to be an exciting episode. It's electric, and it's happening right now. But first up, I've got a few books I wanted to talk with you about, and I'll have these in my upcoming shopping video as well, but as of this recording, I don't have a date for that video yet, so I'm going to tell you about some of them right now. The first book I recently picked up at my local used bookstore is Death Ride. The author is Burton Wohl. The cover is a pile of skulls in a candlelit room, so I was all over it. Here's what the synopsis says. High above the amusement park, the roller coaster climbs towards its summit. Soon the cars will begin their gut-wrenching 60-mile-an-hour plunge. And down below, a pleasant-looking young man presses the button on a remote-controlled detonator. Seconds later, the revelers' squeals of excitement turn to screams of terror as the coaster hurls off into the void where death and mutilation wait. Stage 1 of Eddie Parnassus' master plan is complete. Unless someone can stop him, he'll soon be the richest mass killer in history. Now, this is a UK publication on Granada from 1980. On the back cover, it states that this book was originally published under the name Rollercoaster in 1977, and that it's based on a screenplay. So then I checked movies under the title Rollercoaster, and I came up with a 1977 film starring Henry Fonda and Richard Widmark that seems to be the right connection. And here's a really odd thing. There's a 1962 Fawcett Gold Medal paperback titled The Death Ride, and that's by Neil McNeil. And guess what? It's about an amusement park that turns into a slaughterhouse according to the cover. The cover has this woman running from this wild roller coaster. What a coincidence, right? But anyway, that's the book I got. Death Ride by Burton Wohl, 1980, Granada. The other book I got is a Western. The name of it is Purgatory, and it was published by Fawcett in 1986. The author is G. Clifton Weisler. The synopsis says, a lone man against a lawless mob. Brian Drain accidentally killed a man. It wasn't his fault, but nobody in town would believe that. All they knew or wanted to know was that this stranger would pay with his life when they got their hands on him. That sent Brian Drain on the run through a wilderness hell. On his trail was a kill-crazy crew headed by a rancher who had never met a man he couldn't outsmart and outshoot. Brian Drain didn't have a map, he didn't have a gun, and by any reasonable odds, he didn't stand a chance against this mob. But Brian Drain had stopped being reasonable. He was mad. Fighting mad. Doesn't that sound good? Now, this author, again, the name is G. Clifton Weisler. He's the perfect example of what we're going to talk about momentarily. He specialized in writing westerns in the 1980s and 1990s, but he also wrote young adult westerns and adventures set in and around the Civil War or the early exploration and establishment of the pioneers here in North America. You could be reading his traditional western or a young adult western, and honestly, the genres really just blur. The variable is normally just the age of the protagonist. We're going to talk about this in a bit. I don't want to get too far ahead, but this book, again, the name of it is Purgatory, Fawcett publication from 1986. It sounds great. All right, so I received a package from Starkhouse Press. They sent me 2 books scheduled for release in August. The first is a twofer by Gil Brewer. The books included are The Squeeze, originally published by Ace in 1955, and The Girl Screamed, which was originally published in 1956 by Fawcett. The introduction to this twofer is by David Rachels, and I'm really looking forward to this twofer. The other book Starkhouse sent me is their 73rd Black Gat book. The title is The Joy Wheel, and it's by Paul W. Fairman. This was originally published by Lion Books in 1954. I'm really looking forward to reading both of these books, and as always, thanks to Starkhouse Press for sending these books to me. I really appreciate it. And speaking of Starkhouse Press, I received this really nice message on our Facebook Messenger from a fan named Scott. And he had this to say about my recent conversation with Starkhouse Press owner and editor Greg Shepard. Now, Scott sent me this message, and it says, I'm sitting back with a beer and a cigar, and I just finished listening to your interview with Greg Shepard from Starkhouse Press and absolutely loved it. Your questions were spot on and exactly the kind of things I would have asked myself. Seriously, it was such a great conversation and gave such an insightful look behind the curtain. Thanks to you, my Amazon cart is now loaded with a stack of Starkhouse books. Keep up the awesome work. This one was for the books. So, Scott, thanks so much for that message and for your support. It really means a lot. I'm so glad that you enjoyed that. Man, that conversation between Greg and I was really, really good, and it's available for free. You can watch it on YouTube, listen to it on the same place you probably found this podcast episode as well. Watch the video or listen to the audio, but just go out there and listen to it if you haven't already. I also received a book from an author named Sasha, I probably say the last name wrong, Zariston. So Sasha Zariston sent me this book. It's out now in digital and physical copies. In fact, I bought this book in digital version before he reached out to me and sent me the physical copy. But the book is titled 2024 Attack on America, Enter Demurge. I think I'm saying that right or wrong. I don't know. Demiurge. Enter Demurge. The synopsis is 2024 Attack on America is a masterful cybersecurity thriller where the realms of political espionage, technological suspense, and military action converge. As mysterious cyber attacks escalate and state-of-the-art drones are hijacked, Gabriel is tasked with unraveling complex threats involving entities as secretive as the NSA, FBI, CIA, and the elusive deep state. Navigating treacherous waters, one wrong move could spell disaster. Now, typically, I don't do modern thrillers or tech thrillers, but the author assures me that it's in the wheelhouse of what I do here at Paperback Warrior, so we'll see. Thanks for the book, Sasha. Again, the title is 2024 Attack on America, Enter Demurge, author Sasha Zariston. So I look forward to reading this. All right, so I'm going to put the books away for now, and I'm going to move on to some other things here. I wanted to tell you about some exciting opportunities I've got. First and foremost, I'm going to be contributing an article about femme fatales in the next issue of Men's Adventure Quarterly. This will be issue number 12, and it should be out by the second half of this summer. This article is a look at 10 of my favorite femme fatale books or stories. I'm honored that the editors Bob Dice and Bill Cunningham asked me to be a part of it, so look forward to that. Further, I teamed up with Bill Cunningham to sponsor this year's Pulp Fest, which is happening in Pittsburgh. Bill designed an awesome full-page advertisement for Paperback Warrior, and it's going to be the full back cover of the event's annual Pulpster collectible program. That ad will also appear in the same Men's Adventure Quarterly magazine issue I mentioned earlier, issue number 12. So it's going to be there as well. So you got two opportunities to check it out. But that Pulpster, when I say we're sponsoring it, we paid for that full page ad, and that money, of course, goes back into the printing of the Pulpster and helping out with all the weekend's festivities. So it's going to be really cool. I'm glad that I was able to do that. I'm also working on an audiobook for an author. I can't give away too much right now, but I just recorded my audio narration of a few pages for this author, and I received his blessing, so that project's been greenlit. I may only do one podcast episode in July, just to make a little room for this audiobook. So keep an eye out for that. I'll make an announcement once the author's cool with it. And of course, I'm always busy doing videos and video shorts and all this stuff. It's just crazy. On top of all that, on top of everything else, I'm an approved Wikipedia contributor now. So I put up a page on the great Ralph Hayes, who wrote Buffalo Hunter, and he wrote Soldier of Fortune books under Peter McCurtain's name. He wrote Nick Carter Killmaster books. Ralph Hayes is amazing. But you can go out there and read my Ralph Hayes article on Wikipedia. I'm going to try to write some more pages in the future. It's a chore. Honestly, it's a real chore, but I figured out how to write the HTML code in their sandbox pretty quickly. If you're an author or a publisher or you have intellectual property that needs a Wikipedia page, please reach out to me. I can provide this service to you at a reasonable hourly cost. Starkhouse Press, Bold Venture Press, Men's Adventure Quarterly, Men's Adventure Library, Brash Books, whoever you are, a Wikipedia page sure would be resourceful. I'm just saying. Reach out to me. All right. My last bit of business is to beg you for business. I'm begging. I make my living as an insurance agent, and I've got 17 years of experience as a Medicare benefits advisor. If you are on Medicare and you want a reliable agent that knows his stuff, you need to contact me. Even if you already have a policy, I can request to be your agent of record, and I can manage your Medicare business for the future. You won't be surprised with unexpected changes every year because I'm looking after your interest. You'll get a call from me every fall to let you know what's going on for the next year. No book is more valuable to me than my own book of business, so let me help you. Call or text me 540-312-7062. Again, 540-312-7062. And let's talk Medicare. All right, now that all that's out of the way, I want to jump into today's feature because it's going to be awesome. I'm going to hit that snazzy little tune, and you can get ready for some fine literary education. Here we go. All right. Today's feature is on Arthur Catherall. Trust me, you've probably never heard of this guy before. But today's going to be all about educating you on this wonderful author and just a really cool vintage nautical fiction spotlight. But before I start jabbering about his life and literary work, I feel like I need to set the table first. The main dish we're serving is young adult books, and I want to go into that a little bit. Here's my personal experience with young adult books prior to this year. I only knew that I enjoyed young adult books when I was a kid, and they mostly consisted of the Hardy Boys. Those types of young adult books I consider to be more of a juvenile series. It's really easy stuff with a uniform formula and kids as the heroes. Now, the same can be said for the Three Investigators, Tom Swift, and so forth. I love that stuff, but I consider it to be juvenile fiction for a reason. My other opinion of young adult is something like The Hunger Games or Divergent. That type of young adult fiction is more accessible to teenagers, but is vastly read and even celebrated by all ages. I mean, we've probably all had that coworker that doesn't normally read books come up to you at the coffee pot or something and say, "Hey, I'm devouring my son or my nephew's borrowed copy of The Maze Runner or Harry Potter," and they go on and on and on about how great it is. In that moment, I say to myself, man, I wish I could convince you to read Mac Bolan or Peter McCurtain to really get your head ripped off with action and adventure. But that's another rant altogether. There's this blog writer. Her name is Sherry Early. She's got this blog titled Semicolon Blog. She summed up my preconceived notions about young adult fiction in 2023, and here's what she said, quote, "What are boys and girls reading in the way of adventure stories these days? Most of the realistic fiction I read these days for middle grade readers is problem fiction. Mom is sinking into depression, and the child must cope with the fallout. Or the main character is autistic or has a learning disability, or the bad developers are going to turn the local park into a parking lot. And there's nothing wrong with any of that stuff, but where's the adventure? Many young readers are into fantasy fiction, which does have an adventure element, but it's not usually an adventure that the reader can imagine participating in." End quote. And that's what I'm saying. The novels of yesteryear for young people were full of adventure. And I've totally missed an entire genre of vintage young adult adventure fiction. And this ran from the heyday I think was probably the 1940s through the 1970s. But I totally missed this entire genre. And I emphasize adventure in caps. This is fiction written by authors that was marketed by the publisher to teen boys in hardcover with a few illustrations. Now, this is not to be confused with picture books. Picture books are normally 15 to 20 large print pages with big illustrations and fit an age group of like 8 to 13 years of age. These are way more dynamic than that. Plus, these books were often interchangeable when it comes to the authors who wrote them. For example, you could look at a writer like Frank Bonham. He wrote hard-hitting westerns, and he also wrote crime-noir. But he also wrote young adult books like War Beneath the Sea or Honor Bound. These are straight-up adventure books with lots of action and exotic locales. The books feature male heroes in dire circumstances, either in war or in some personal quest dealing with a family tragedy or a new discovery. Other crime noir, pulp, and action adventure writers wrote young adult novels as well. Authors like William Campbell Galt or John Reese, for example. Most of these books that were marketed to young adults could easily have just been mainstream fiction. I could read something by Eric Leyland, who's a prolific writer of young adult fiction, and see how it could be a regular paperback published by the likes of Bantam, Ace, or Fawcett Gold Medal. I just read one of Leyland's books, and the main character kills two people. This is a young adult book. You see what I'm getting at? Adults read Tarzan, they read Doc Savage, The Phantom, The Shadow, The Avenger, and all of those could be and probably were devoured by teen boys first. No difference here with these young adult books I'm talking about. In fact, Tom Simon, who used to co-host this show with me, he wrote a review for a Mission Impossible TV tie-in book that was titled The Priceless Particle. It was a Whitman book marketed to young adults. But in his review, he says, and I quote, "It's interesting that this book was originally released for the juvenile market because there's nothing childish about the writing or plot. Powell's language is mature, and the geopolitics aren't dumbed down. Granted, there's no sex or profanity, but I bet there wasn't any in the adult Mission Impossible paperbacks authored by Walter Wager using the John Tiger pseudonym. Part of me wonders if Powell was even informed that this would be packaged for kids with a hardcover like a Hardy Boys novel." End quote. The reason why these young adult books closely resemble something like a Fawcett Gold Medal or a Bantam paperback is because of the constraints and censorship placed on the early and mid 20th century publishers. There was no graphic sex in these books. There wasn't a tremendous amount of profanity. In most cases, the violence is a sentence or three and it's over. It's nothing graphic. It's the same thing you see with the film industry of that same era. Due to the Hays Code, films were mostly void of nudity and profanity. You see a lot of movies of that era that weren't made for young adults, now streaming on various platforms under the genre of family. That really wasn't the case, but the lack of anything taboo makes it family friendly now, or what I consider the confines of a young adult audience. I want to do an entire episode on young adult fiction, talking about this theme and writers like Rob White and Richard Armstrong, for example, that specialized in writing great adventure novels but marketed to the young adult base. I'm going to add that I found the British and the Australian young adult writers to have a little more violence and edginess to their work, much more than the Americans, but I'm going to get into all that in a future episode. I don't want to bog us down here because I want to talk about Arthur Catherall. In my small sample size, I feel like he's writing the best young adult adventure fiction of that era more than anyone else, and this is my feature on him. He was a British writer that was extremely successful. He was mostly published in England, but a lot of his books were published right here in the US as well. By the 1970s, his publisher claimed that his books were selling over 1 million copies, and I'm sure that number increased into the 1980s. His genre was mostly nautical fiction, but he really dabbled in everything. Now, I discovered Arthur in 2019 when I found a used paperback titled The Strange Intruder. It's got a picture of a boy on a rope hanging from a cliff. I read it, I absolutely loved it, and I've kept an eye out in every store I've shopped at to find more of Arthur's books. He's such a tremendous storyteller, and I'm really excited to highlight his life and work for you today. So let's jump in. Arthur was born on February 6, 1906 in Lancashire, England. In 1934, when Arthur was 28, he landed his first published writing gigs. His first story may have been Phantom Husky's Gold, a short that appeared in The Pioneer. He followed with 2 more stories for The Pioneer that same year. Throughout the 1930s, Arthur had stories published in the Boys' Own paper, Chum's Annual, Boys' Ace Library, and the Gloucester Journal. But he was tiring of the short story game, and he transitioned into writing young adult books. He had 5 books published in the 1930s, including Campfire Stories, The Rival Tugboats, Black Gold, Vanished Whaler, and Adventures Limited. He also married Elizabeth Bennon in 1936, and they had 2 children, a son and a daughter. This is the part of nearly all of my features where World War II comes in. In 1940, at the age of 34, Arthur participated in the war. He served England with 4 years in the Royal Air Force. He saw action in eastern Bengal and in Burma. He traveled widely through Europe, Africa, and the Far East as part of his service. Now, in the 1940s, Arthur didn't have as many stories published. I counted just 4 in the Fiction Mag Index. He didn't seem to write much at all in the 1940s, with just 4 books total that decade: Keepers of the Khyber, The Flying Submarine, The Bull Patrol, and Riders of the Black Camel. I want to pause here for a moment and discuss the first series title that Arthur created. Since we're in the timeline of the 1930s and 1940s, Arthur's first series title was The Bull Patrol. The Bull Patrol was published in this time frame. The short stories consisted of 6 entries in the boy's own paper beginning in October 1939. These stories consist of a Boy Scout named Jim Barnes that convinces 4 of his friends to create a special patrol. These adventurers solve minor crimes in the northern England region, stuff like sheep stealing. In other stories, the scouts are rescuing individuals caught in a flood. There's a story about a plane crash. There's another story about a clash with hunters. The locale is typically farms and farmland with dense forests surrounding it. Again, this is the Bull Patrol series, and these stories may have been compiled in the 1949 book titled The Bull Patrol. I don't own that book, so I can't really tell you much about it. Right after the war, Arthur worked temporarily in the cotton spinning industry before embarking on a decade of traveling. He had told his peers and associates in the publishing industry that he was concerned that the boys who read his books should quickly realize that he knew his stuff when it came to exotic locales and experiences. His hobbies included mountain climbing, camping, sailing, and just traveling everywhere. His travels took him all over the globe. He had a detailed knowledge of geography that was helped by his voyages. Some of those included a trek across Lapland from the Russian border to the Norwegian coast. On a British trawler, he made several trips to the fishing shores off the coast of Iceland. This, combined with his travel experiences with the RAF, helped create believability in his books and stories. By 1950, Arthur has settled down and he's settled in behind his typewriter. By the end of 1950, Arthur has written nearly 40 books, so many that he needed to create pseudonyms to keep from flooding the market under his own name. Throughout his career, Arthur would use names like A.R. Channell, Dan Corby, Peter Hallard, Margaret Thuthen, Trevor Main, and Linda Peters to write standalone books and series titles. I want to go over 2 big series titles that Arthur began in the 1950s. Now these, I think, fans of men's action-adventure paperbacks are really going to enjoy. The first one I want to talk about is titled Bulldog, just like it sounds, Bulldog. This is a nautical adventure series that ran a total of 11 books between 1954 through 1968. In England, the books were published by J.M. Denton Sons and had black and white interior illustrations. In America, the series was published by New York's Criterion Books. This series is about a 17-year-old skipper named Jack Frodsham. He commands the Bulldog, which is a tugboat harbored in Singapore. Through the series, Jack's crew on the Bulldog consists of Husky Hudson, who's a veteran seaman worth his salt, and a Malay native named Amat. These 3 are the main characters in the series. All these books are nautical adventures at about 200 pages or less, and the locale is the South China Seas. Now, I read the series debut recently. It's titled 10 Fathoms Deep, and here's what my future review on the blog will say. In 10 Fathoms Deep, readers are introduced to 17-year-old Jack Frodsham. After finishing school, Jack arrives in Singapore to meet with his father, Captain Frodsham. The captain has enjoyed a successful salvaging and freighting career with his tugboat Bulldog. Based out of the Lion City of Singapore, Frodsham has made his living in the warm, rolling waters of the South China Seas. Now his dreams of Jack joining the family business have become a reality. In the first chapter, Jack's father meets with a man who is purportedly dead. This man, Husky Hudson, explains to the Frodshams that he was a mate on the freight ship Tenasserim, under the command of Captain Miller. However, the ship was mysteriously attacked and sunk. Hudson was ruled dead by drowning, but he managed to escape the attack. He advises the Froshams that a criminal enterprise that owned the ship sunk it for insurance money. Now, Captain Miller, who died in the attack, his legacy has been scrutinized under a false public statement that the Tenacerium perished due to the captain's poor navigation of the reef. Hudson wants to bring honor to Captain Miller's widow and has a plan in place to preserve Miller's legacy. Shortly after meeting with Hudson, Jack's father is nearly killed in a stabbing. Now hospitalized, he asks that Jack meet with Hudson to go over the plan and to take control of the tugboat for all future jobs. His mate will be Husky Hudson, and they're joined with a small group of Malays led by Amat. Together, this crew will man the tugboat to a secret place where Hudson knows that the Tenacerium is lying intact in just 10 fathoms of water. If they can successfully retrieve this vessel, they can prove that it wasn't the captain's negligence or a reef miscalculation that led to the sinking. But as the salvage operation commences, the crew is plagued by 2 rival tugboats and a crew of cutthroat criminals doing the bidding of a mysterious mastermind. 10 Fathoms Deep is an amazing book. First, forget the young adult stigma that may be associated with Catherall in this series. The book reads like a nautical adventure penned by someone like A.S. Fleischman. In fact, the nautical fiction written by the likes of John Blackburn, Conrad Dawn, Arthur D. Houghton Smith, and James Gribben certainly would welcome the tugboat crew. While there isn't any romance, which is par for the course for a good nautical romp, there's plenty of tense adventure and intrigue that saturate the book under this author's excellent prose. The book, right at 200 pages, is brimming over with a frantic pace as the tugboat races against the clock to salvage their target before they're obliterated by rival ships. There's this panic-stricken moment of horror when the tugboat is nearly bombed and Jack must penetrate a pitch-black ocean bottom without a guide. I mean, there's shipwrecks, there's island adventure, sunken treasure, some shady characters, an aerial romp, some gunplay. But what really sets the book apart is the amount of contractual intrigue. And what I mean by that is Jack and Hudson must navigate some of the details of this ship's original logs, their competition with a rival salvage gang, and the swerve of an existing job to take on this retrieval heist, I guess you could call it. There's also numerous hot-headed propositions made that force Jack into some really tight spots. With the level of adventure and exciting locale, 10 Fathoms Deep gets my highest recommendation. Again, this series is titled Bulldog, and this book review is of the series debut, 10 Fathoms Deep. And you can look for this book on Abe Books. I think they've got it used there. The next series I want to tell you about is The Fighting Four. The Fighting Four. It was published under a pseudonym of A.R. Channell by Children's Press in England. I wasn't able to determine if the series was published in America. My guess it probably is, but I'm not sure who the publisher was. The Fighting Four consists of 5 books published between 1958 through 1964. These are Team Commando books set during World War II. My guess is that Arthur was influenced to write a military action-adventure series based on W.E. John's wildly popular series Biggles and the spin-off Gimlet. While I didn't have the series debut, I did get my hands on the series' second installment titled The Tunnel Busters. And here's what I wrote from my blog review, which hasn't been posted yet. This 188-page book begins with a fitting introduction to the team members. Sam Foster is the radio communications specialist. China Brown manages the team's firearms and logistics. Curly Bates is the explosives expert. And the group is led by the all-around fighting man, Sergeant Ted Harris. Based on their success in the first book's adventure, which featured a Norwegian locale, the 4 have been assigned an explosive new mission. Hitler's routed supplies for his troops by way of railroad through an underground tunnel from rural France into Italy. Due to the rugged mountaintops, the interior design of the tunnel, and the anti-aircraft defense, British intelligence wants the team to parachute in and detonate explosives within the tunnel. Now, paramount to the mission's success is working with the rebel French in this isolated village controlled by the Germans. Man, this Tunnel Busters, non-stop action from scene to scene, just amazing. The book's pace kicks off with Sam's spiraling descent away from the team due to this barrage of German gunfire. So Sam is miles away, and he meets this young shepherd boy and his dog that actually prove crucial to the mission. From the onset, there's a gunfight with Germans, there's a tent standoff in a nearby village, there's a rescue attempt, the aforementioned tunnel busting business, and this wild hostage situation that really elevated the book's finale into an emotional roller coaster as German leaders are set to execute members of the team. And again, don't be afraid of the young adult aura of the series and its reputation. Despite the lack of violent details from the author, it's clear that enemy forces are dying. Now, granted, the team will typically just knock out their opponents or, quote, riddle them with gunfire, but Catherall's storytelling has a darker overtone at times with talk of torture, firing squads, there's threats of mass slaughter of this village. I mean, comparisons are often made to John's Gimlet series, which is expected. However, from research online, it suggests that the Fighting Four are more adult in nature compared to the Gimlet or Biggle series. Despite lukewarm reviews, my sample size experience with the Fighting Four was exceptional. I thoroughly enjoyed this high adventure military yarn, and I recommend it to men's action adventure fans of any age. The other series I wanted to tell you about is called Con-Genty. Now, I kind of made that up. Con-Genty. I read the first book, Coral Reef Castaway. Coral Reef Castaway was published in 1958 under Arthur's pseudonym of Peter Hallard. It's kind of a dumb title, I admit. In this book, a young man named Con is thrown overboard and accidentally left in the Pacific Ocean. He ends up washing ashore of a small island, and there he's saved by an old man named Genty. It turns out that 21 years ago, Genty was in that area of the ocean engaging in pearl culturing. Now, if you don't know what that is, don't worry. Arthur does an amazing job explaining this fascinating business of pearl farming through this elderly character, Genty. Genty explains he had a shipwreck and has been on the island for 21 years now. With Con's help, the two can paddle the 30-plus miles to civilization and be rescued. But Genty doesn't just want a rescue. He wants to come back with diving gear so the two of them can dive down and get the pearls. There's like hundreds of thousands of dollars in pearls just sitting there in an oyster bed. But like any good rags to riches feel-good story, there's got to be a criminal element, right? A group of rival divers figure out that Genty and Con are up to this diving and getting these pearls, and they want in on the action, but they want all the pearls for themselves. This was a really good read. I enjoyed the pearl culturing stuff and all the neat little nuggets of information that Arthur injects into the story about diving, the technical nuances of diving, ocean pressures, how to make stuff like homemade coffee and sugar and bread on the island. It was all a really great learning experience for me. The exciting diving narrative and underwater adventure was just really icing on the cake. Now, Coral Reef Castaway has a sequel. At the beginning, I said this is a series. It does have a sequel. The name of that book is Barrier Reef Bandits, and it was published in 1960. I consider both of these books a series under the title Con-Genty, which is the name of the duo's boat. I also believe that there's a third book as well, titled Guardian of the Reef. I don't have that book, so I can't definitively say it's the Con-Genty series, but pretty sure it is. But the book's like $18 on 8 books, and I really don't want to spend the money right now. Aside from these series titles, as I mentioned, he wrote a number of standalone books too, and I wanted to review just a couple of those for you as well, just shorter reviews. The first book that I wanted to mention to you in this feature is the book that started it all for me with this Arthur Catherall author. It's called The Strange Intruder, and it was published in the U.S. by Archway in 1964. It was originally published in England as The Strange Invader. Now, this novel is on the chilly Faroes Islands, which geographically is positioned north of the British Isles and just southeast of Iceland. Again, this is a region that Arthur knew quite well based on his experiences traveling there. A 16-year-old fisherman named Sven is thrust into this crazy situation. All of the men in the village are trapped at sea in a boating accident with their schooner. They're on their way back from a fishing trip and hit the rocks. Now, from the distant shore, Sven sees something leap from the schooner and plunge into the sea. So Sven races up the shore to help rescue whoever or whatever fell from the ship. He's thinking it was a crewman. Instead, it was a polar bear that the crew had captured on their fishing trip. There's a whole story on why they had it and what the goal was, but the polar bear is really out of his element and hits the beach and goes berserk. Sven panics and runs to the village to tell the women and kids that the bear is coming. The Strange Intruder is a really fun adventure story, as Sven is forced to battle this rampaging bear in the village during a rainstorm. There's these rocky cliffs, there's island life, swollen seas from the storm. It's really all a metaphor that Sven is battling his own childhood in the form of the bear. Sort of end of innocence tale as Sven becomes an adult through this battle. It was really a great book. I wanted to quote you a portion of a review of The Strange Intruder, written by Sherry Early on the Semicolon blog. And in her review, she had this to say, quote, I've heard of Arthur Catherall as an author of children's or young adult fiction, but I've always thought of him, without having read any of his books, as a sort of minor, second-rate potboiler fiction writer. If The Strange Intruder is a good example of the rest of Catherall's work, he's actually a first-rate adventure writer, unquote. She's echoing my sentiments exactly. My last standalone review is Arthur's The Night of the Black Frost. It was published in England and the US in 1968. I have the review posting later this year on the blog, but here's what I wrote about it. Norwegian young adult Leif has just graduated high school and is in that sort of life lull, deciding how to spend his time prior to going off to college. His friends convince him to tour Europe for months, but Leif's father has another plan. He'll support and pay Leif's way to northwest to the Barents Sea. Remember, they're in Norway, so he's going to go northwest to the Barents Sea, which is this frigid wasteland of ice between the Arctic Ocean and Russia. Sounds awful. He convinces Leif to spend a few weeks with his uncles, Peter and Jan, on their commercial fishing expeditions. Now, Leif, longing for adventure and maturity, he accepts. On board his uncle's fishing trawler, Leif experiences this harrowing 2-day adventure. His uncle Peter is really hesitant about Leif's participation in this dangerous fishing expedition. Uncle Jan, he's a bit more patient and understanding. For Leif, his endurance and stamina is tested when these 2 Russian pilots plunge into the frosty ocean in an accident. When Peter and Jan attempt a rescue on a dinghy, they become lost at sea trying to find these pilots. It's up to Leif to run the trawler by himself and also attempt to make a rescue of his uncles and try to find the pilots while enduring this awful black frost. I didn't even know what that was, but think of it when fog turns to ice in the air. That's black frost. This 166-page book was a short example of what Catherall does so well. Nautical adventure storytelling that features ordinary young people facing life-threatening adult decisions that accelerates their maturity and personal growth. As I always preach in my reviews, throw out the stigma of young adult. This book has an intense survival element with some gritty life choices, including like possible amputation of a leg. There's a serious frostbite, hypothermia, very personal conflict facing one of the Russian pilots. There's turmoil and intrigue involving the Russian government and their interaction with these Norwegian fishermen. Night of the Black Frost is a fantastic adventure that showcases really everything I love about this author. For example, if you like, think of the name here, Hammond Innes. Hammond Innes' book, The White South, comes to mind when I read this book. So look no further. If you like Hammond Innes, then you're really going to like Arthur Catherall. Also of note, this book, A Night of the Black Frost, is based on Arthur's own experience fishing off the coast of Iceland. Some of the events that transpire in the book really happened to the author. He was caught in a black frost situation at sea, and he wanted to write about the experience in a fictional way. All right, so that brings us to the end of this feature. Now, Arthur, he continued to write books through the 1960s and 1970s under his own name and pseudonyms. He wrote nearly 65 books during that time. He only had 1 book published in the 1980s, and that's because Arthur Catherall passed away on January 6, 1980 at the age of 73. Honestly, I wish I knew more about him and the life he led. I'm not totally convinced anyone has really solidified an actual bibliography for him. It's hard to imagine how many books he wrote under different names. I'm sure there's sources out there with the information, but the internet is somewhat bare when it comes to this author. Now, my biggest resource for this feature was a great article written by Jim McKenzie on the collectingbooksandmagazines.com website. Without that resource, this feature it was not possible. I also relied heavily on archive.org, the Fiction Mag Index, Wikipedia, and the Semicolon blog, which I mentioned earlier. Now, off to the last order of business, which is today's review. This review is for a short story compilation titled Do You Know Me and Other Aberrations by Bruce Elliott. Now, Bruce Elliott was a prolific writer of crime fiction and science fiction in the pulps. He also worked as a television screenwriter and practiced stage magic. He wrote 15 novels for the Shadow magazine between 1946 and 1948, and he helped edit and publish a number of men's magazines like Rogue and The Gent. Now, back in August of 2023, I read and reviewed Elliott's fabulous short story, Do You Know Me, originally published in the February 1953 issue of Thrilling Detective. I enjoyed the story so much that I contacted Greg Shepard at Starkhouse Press and informed him that he should read the story as well. Thankfully, 2 years later, Greg and the great Starkhouse Press folks have published the short story compilation by Elliott containing 10 of his best works culled from the detective and science fiction pulps and magazines. The story I recommended to Greg, Do You Know Me, was used as the title story, and the artwork from the original publication adorns the front cover. Wonders never cease. Now, this episode is running a little long, and I'd planned on capsule reviews for each of the 10 stories. How about I do, just looking at the time here, how about I do a quick capsule review of the first 5 stories right now for you, and you can come back tomorrow and visit the blog at paperbackwarrior.com and read my capsule reviews for the remaining 5 stories. How's that sound? All right, let's kick it off with the first story, Do You Know Me? As I mentioned earlier, this was pulled from Thrilling Detective's February 1953 issue. The author introduces the man nobody knew as a resident of a West 47th Street apartment just east of Broadway. The room in which the man awakens has door frames and windows stuffed with newspapers. Beside the bed, written in lipstick, is an ominous message scrawled, "Since you can't catch me, and since I don't want to kill again, I'm going to kill myself." That's what it says. This man, who isn't named, I refer to him simply as the killer or the man nobody knew, he's stalking New York City and he's savagely cutting off people's faces while maniacally asking them, "Do you know me? Do you recognize me? And where do you know me from?" Through the course of Elliott's compelling, awe-inspiring story, more characters are introduced, each with their own backstory. Now, all these characters entwine in a disturbing series of events that mirrors an active shooter situation today. In this story, the killer begins randomly murdering people in nightmarish fashion in the middle of Times Square. Elliott provides some riveting stuff involving sexuality, social unrest, mental illness. This is a great story. This is a must-read. Next is Vengeance Is Not Enough, which is from Stories Annual, Volume 1, 1955. Vengeance Is Not Enough. This story begins with a man named Henry Timms sweating from shock therapy at the hands of a psychiatrist. As the doctor prods him, Henry recalls the events that led him to the doctor, the horrific murder of his young son in a hit and run. But just as the past events unveil before the reader, a gunshot sounds and the doctor is killed. The story then follows Henry trying to find answers on what happened and who's responsible. It's an effective, innocent man-on-the-run story with a distinct flavor that only Elliott could provide, ethereal, violent, and wholly unique. Third is The Darkened Room. The Darkened Room was from Popular Detective's May 1953 issue. Now, matching the title's dimness, Elliott's bleak writing elevates the story as a real highlight of the collection. This criminal named Garrow and his partner Madigan have stolen gems from a celebrity and they've hocked them. Now, at a hotel in New York, Garrow pays a visit to Madigan and selfishly strangles him to death to be sure all the money is his now. Then the narrative is a roller coaster as Garrow runs from the cops by seeking shelter in this dark flophouse. But, like all good heists, the criminal never gets away with the cabbage. This one has a fitting ending that serves a type of cautionary tale, advising us all that crime doesn't pay. The fourth story is called Carnage in Colossa. It's from Sea Stories, November 1953. Tommy Winters is an American crewman on a shipping trawler. At an extended stop on a small Pacific island, Tommy strikes up an intense affair with a married islander named Aquila. One night, he awakens from a drunken beating to discover his passport, money, and ship has left him behind. Penniless and homeless, Tommy agrees to work for Aquila's husband, this fat, seedy merchant and restaurant owner named Madigan. If Tommy can do all the dirty work around the place for a week, like mopping up piss and puke, then he'll earn enough money to get a transport to the nearest U.S. embassy. After 1 week of working for Madigan by day and sleeping with his wife by night, Tommy is hopeful he can get away. But there's a surprise awaiting Tommy and the reader after a week's work. Carnage in Colossa was an exceptional tale laced with grime and shady characters. Again, it's a cautionary tale as well that it's got a really fitting and enjoyable ending, but left me guessing where Elliott was going to go with these despicable people and where to dump them. It was just a great story. Last one I want to tell you about is Death Lives in Brooklyn. It's from Thrilling Detective, April 1953. Farnell is an attorney that's lost everything. He now spends his time on 47th Street and Broadway playing nickel and dime ball. A mob henchman is roughing up a couple people when Farnell hears this victim whisper him to check the bathroom. That same victim warns Farnell to avoid the police because they're, quote, iced. In the John, Farnell finds this signed document sealed in an envelope. He has the foresight to open up the envelope and take a photo of the document using one of the arcade camera vending machines. That was the thing back then. Farnell then goes on the run from the syndicate and their killers who want this mysterious document. He's eventually caught and ordered for execution in this rundown section of Brooklyn. Like any good crime noir, the innocent man on the run is being chased by the crooked cops and the crooks. This was such a great story and was really ahead of its time if you think about it. Today, we take photos of documents with our phones all the time, but back then it was unheard of outside of just espionage. Overall, after reading the whole book, I'll have to say this is one of the better short story collections I've read. But come back tomorrow or anytime after and check out the reviews for the rest of the stories. You're going to enjoy these reviews. Again, this book is out now from Starkhouse Press. It's called Do You Know Me and Other Aberrations, and the author is Bruce Elliott. And that's a wrap on this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back again in a few weeks. I also hope to have a shopping video up in the next week or two. Keep stopping by the blog for 4 to 5 reviews weekly. The YouTube channel is really busy with a new review every day around 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. There's also TikTok, Instagram, Threads, archive.org, Facebook with tons and tons of book discussions and posts. In fact, Paperback Warrior on Facebook is nearing 10,000 followers. So there's a really great community in there, so you can talk to other fans of these same books and authors. It's a great place. But in the meantime, enjoy whatever it is you're doing, and I'm going to see you next time.